Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the virtual Palm Beach International Equestrian Center educational series presented by Adequan here at the Winter Equestrian Festival for WEF Week 4. My name is Miranda Tiona, and I am your returning host and educational series coordinator here at the Winter Equestrian Festival. And we have 9 more weeks remaining every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to learn together. Again, another exceptional turnout last week with viewers joining from all over the world and all over the entire continental US. So again, a huge thank you. Your participation in the series is most appreciated. Throughout the session, to engage virtually with us, please utilize the Q&A message center at the bottom of your screen. You should see a little icon that says Q&A. That's where you can go and type your question at any time throughout the session. And our speaker will do her very best to answer your questions. And we will also have moderators answering questions as well. So very excited and love interaction. So definitely encourage you to send your questions. Lastly, I would like to say a huge thank you to Karina Brez Jewelry for providing a luxury item, being a limited edition light pink diamond, 18 karat rose gold horseshoe necklace, valued at over $3,000 for the grand prize giveaway. In case you've missed the previous sessions, how it works. Register and attend. We can see if you have attended. And that gains you 1 entry. The winner will be announced April 1 on our very last session together. And you don't have to be present. We will simply be emailing the winner. So make sure that the email that you registered with is indeed an email that you check. Now, with all that said, let's begin. I am delighted to introduce today's topic and speaker. Today's educational series session is sponsored by Platinum Performance, and the topic is a deep dive into equine gastric ulcer syndrome. A lifelong competitive horseman, Dr. Tori Maxwell, our speaker for today, had a very successful riding career with Hunter Hall of Fame member and 1968 Olympic equestrian Carol Hoffman Thompson for 10 years before she embarked onto veterinarian school. Dr. Maxwell is a 1999 graduate of Tuskegee University School of Veterinarian Medicine, and her area of focus has been sport horse performance and working to bring unique and novel technology to the veterinarian market. Dr. Maxwell is part of the Platinum Performance team with an interest in sharing the biological role of nutrition in addressing and optimizing animal health. Now, without further ado, I will welcome Dr. Tori Maxwell to turn on her camera and begin prepping her presentation.
So my name is Dr. Tori Maxwell. Thank you for being here this evening. Like Miranda said, I serve as the technical services veterinarian for Platinum Performance. And I wanted to thank the Palm Beach International Equestrian Center, the educational series, for inviting me to speak today. So information seekers, welcome. I think you're really going to enjoy this talk. There's something in here for new and upcoming horse owners, but there's also lots of nuggets for those that are really much more knowledgeable and have a lot to do. So there's a plethora of things to learn inside of here. So did we see the poll results? Because I'm sure it was quite high in having gastric ulcer syndrome. Oh, there it is. There we go. So 86% of you have said that you have dealt with gastric ulcers in one of your horses, and about 30% said no. Well, that's interesting because it is high for sure. And those no people probably have some different management styles, which may be helping them out. So, through research, which we do quite a bit of at Platinum, we're learning that the GI system is injured, and when it is injured, it impacts the overall health of the horse. And we're going to look at the gastrointestinal environment itself. We're going to look at something called leaky gut syndrome. We're going to look at gastric ulcer syndrome. And then I have some very nice research that was presented at the American College of Veterinary Surgeons by Dr. Kanan Whitfield at Texas A&M that I think that you will find very, very useful in managing ulcers. Opposite way. So when the intestines get injured, it affects the whole horse. And now we're treating those horses for their entire system. And unlike some organ systems, the GI tract immensely changes from section to section. So if we think about the mouth and the esophagus, we go to the stomach, the small intestines, the cecum, the large colon, just to name a few, each of those various sections has differing lengths, different diameters, as well as different functions. And we know that each segment plays a unique and vital role in horses' health. So when the GI system is not functioning optimally, the whole horse is absolutely affected. And at Platinum, we really believe that nutrition can impact equine health with key microbial contributors to the gastrointestinal environment. So I have kind of a couple of funny sayings. I said the GI system is simple, yet very complex. And we know that the equine GI system is very elegant and when functioning properly, quite a marvel. And yet when disturbances arise, it can be quite distressing for the horse as well as the owner. A horse may have digestive problems by simple acts of severe weather change, changes in their routine, or an abrupt change maybe in their feed source. I also have written down here fragile. And when I talk about the GI tract being fragile, I don't mean fragile like a flower, I mean fragile like a bomb. When it's going well, it goes very well. When it goes bad, it is really prone to a lot of difficulties. We know that horses can get transient GI disturbances. And we also realize that our modern feeding practices have complicated the situation. As horses were really browsers and then adapted to be grazers, they're really meant to rely on a continual amount of forage for a long period of time. What they're not designed for is large amounts of concentrate twice daily, but that seems to be a culture that we're having harder time putting more forage into the diet and less concentrate. Now, a keen area of intense research, both in human and veterinary medicine, is the microbiome. So the equine gut microbiome represents an extremely complex microbial ecosystem that is comprised of quadrillions of microorganisms. These microorganisms include bacteria, yeast, fungi, and protozoa, with really bacteria thought to be playing a huge pivotal role here. When we lose GI health, it can manifest itself in various ways. It may be outwardly observed with signs such as diarrhea or colic, but it may be more elusive to observe with something called leaky gut syndrome or even gastric ulcers. And we know the resident microflora or the microbiome is often thought of as its own organ now. It's not just a bunch of bacteria that's living inside of the gut. It actually serves this huge role. Its sheer size and constant cell-to-cell communication is very unique, and we're just starting to learn how to unlock what this has been going through. But when this system becomes weakened, that bacterial component goes through a dramatic shift for a multitude of reasons, which we'll talk about. We go into what's known as a state of dysbiosis. And what we know we have here is an imbalance in the healthy bacteria that live in the gut. And the gut is influencing systems all across the horse. It's influencing the musculoskeletal system. It's influencing the respiratory system, the cardiac system, the derm system, your hoof growth. The GI tract with its microbiome is having an impact on all of those components. We know that the genetic material of these microorganisms is certainly very important and varies around the country and even around the globe. We know that they're commensal and symbiotic, which means they actually work together. And we know there's a very small amount of them that are pathogenic. Most of them are really non-pathogenic. We know that there's about 500 species that have been identified and at least 1 quadrillion microorganisms. At Platinum, we're doing quite a bit of in-depth research into the equine microbiome and how nutrition impacts it, not only in daily health, but how it influences disease states. We know that the microbiome shifts in the direction when a disease is beginning to come on, whether it's a a respiratory disease, or perhaps a metabolic disease, or maybe a mild colic, we see a shift in that microbiome. And that's very important that we learn how to integrate this into our daily routine. So what are some big influencers that are happening on the microbiome? Well, I certainly know that lifestyle and environment has a lot to do with it. I realize an older geriatric horse that just goes on trail rides in Vermont has a very different lifestyle than a racehorse that's living at Belmont Park in January, right? Different stressors, different environment, different things. We know the nutritional philosophy of a barn has a lot to do with it, whether they feed lots and lots of forage or if they're still thinking about a lot of concentrate. Stress in competing horses, whether they're racing, show jumping, running barrels, whatever it is. I talk about stress even when I have a band of brood mares and I take one mare off the herd, the whole group goes nuts and they're completely stressed out. So stress comes from a lot of different areas. We talk about birthing conditions. For all practical purposes, a foal is really born sterile, and he works for about the first 60 days of his life, taking on all this microbiome into his environment, creating the microbiome and a big part of his immune system that he's going to carry with him for the rest of his life. Microbiome, we know that the genes, we know that a Percheron is very different from Arabians. So we know that there are all of these influences on microbiome, and we're even still trying to figure out what is a normal microbiome in the healthy horse. And an area that we're going to touch on is medications. We realize that we can't practice veterinary medicine or do what we do with a lot of our horses without the use of medications, but they have a negative consequence on that microbiome. And we have to take a much more proactive approach when we go to utilizing those particular medications. So we're going to talk about leaky gut syndrome. So leaky gut, a lot of people don't think horses get leaky gut. They sort of think of it only in humans, but really horses are very prone to this. It is a subtle and can be kind of a smoldering problem. But for just some basic anatomy and really understanding what leaky gut is about, we're actually looking at a diagram that's looking inside the lumen of the GI system. So think you're sort of looking inside of the garden hose, if you will. And the green dots at the top of the picture, those represent sort of bacteria or nutrients or things that are flushing through the GI system. The yellow represents that nice mucoid layer, which is very responsible for giving us a lot of hydration. And then these blue boxes that you see standing here, these are the key players. These are cells called enterocytes, and their job is to allow the nutrients that come inside the lumen from the digestion that you have, they cross over in a number of ways over these enterocytes and wind up getting taken up by the circulation underneath here. So they're very interesting, and they're very unique is that this layer is the entire length of the GI system. So the GI system is one cell layer thick through the entire system. So this beautiful filtering system allows nutrients to cross over. Now, the important thing that I want to point out to you here is that in these little enterocytes or little blue boxes, is they have these little protein buttons in between them. And the job of those protein buttons is to keep unwanted food sources out from the systemic circulation. This is a cheesecloth. This is a very filtering system that keeps away lipopolysaccharides or bile acids or pathogenic bacteria. We want to keep those out of the circulation into the gut and have them be excreted out in the horse. But these protein buttons that are here are very susceptible to stress, and they're very susceptible to pharmaceuticals. So what can happen is that these cellular junctions or these protein buttons actually break down. So in a normal healthy horse, what we would see is those buttons would relax, they would allow the nutrients to cross over, and then they would come back together again, creating that watertight seal. But in leaky gut syndrome, what's happening is from maybe a horse that ran a race and his body temperature got very high, maybe a horse that ran a fever, maybe a horse that shipped a long distance. Those intercellular junctions break down very easily. They're very fragile, and we wind up getting unwanted pathogenic things crossing over into that systemic circulation. That is leaky gut syndrome. So we know that when that normal intestinal barrier becomes compromised and can no longer protect against harmful luminal contents, including microbial toxins and pathogens. And that comes from a veterinarian out of North Carolina State. And she's done quite some nice research on equine hyperintestinal permeability or leaky gut syndrome. So we know when we get leak into that bloodstream from that gut, those offending pathogens can really cause a lot of havoc in our horses. And the nice thing is that Dr. Stewart had also said in the paper that she had done a number of years ago that there are consequences as a result of barrier malfunction. We lose the barrier, we get harmful molecules crossing over into the systemic circulation that go to the brain, they go to the liver, they go to the kidneys. We see altered pH inside of the gut. We know that about 70% of the immune system lives inside the gut. If we start to get leaky gut syndrome, your immune system becomes wildly overwhelmed. And even in Dr. Stewart's paper that she had written in 2017, she said a sequela to leaky gut may include weight loss, poor performance in mild cases, inflammatory bowel disease, and even systemic inflammatory responses in very severe cases. So if horses are just not responding and performing the way that we anticipate them to, you may consider leaky gut as part of your rule out in trying to figure out how best to manage this horse. Next, I want to introduce and talk a little bit more about equine gastric ulcer syndrome, which probably a lot more of you are a little bit more familiar with. And in the past 30 years, we have seen a tremendous amount of research in the area of equine gastric ulcer disease. For years, researchers were putting the puzzle together about how and why horses suffer from gastric ulcers way back in the 1990s. But it was really the technology of the 3-meter scope that came out in the mid-90s that was really the huge game changer. Because now we could put a scope down long enough to get to the horse's stomach and the supporting structures around there and begin to properly identify the location of these lesions. We have a grading system that we use to score those lesions, and then we could start to develop therapeutic protocols that were really appropriate for which particular lesion these horses had. Some of the limitations is that the 3-meter scope only really gets to the stomach. We can look a little bit inside the first part of the small intestine called the duodenum, but as far as the large colon, the cecum, all that hind gut fermenting environment, we're still having a very difficult time visualizing that. And we do know that horses are susceptible to ulcers in there, even like right dorsal colitis or some other components. We know that equine gastric ulcer syndrome is very, very common. The American Association of Equine Practitioners, about 90% of race horses have gastric ulcers, and about 60% of performance horses, regardless of which performance they are in. The thing that I wanted to work with you tonight is really talking about the two distinct classifications, that equine squamous gastric disease and equine glandular gastric disease are really two distinct diseases. So we know we talk about what are potential causes of ulcers in the horse, right? If we take food away from them for an extended period of time, we know we can drive them into ulcers. We know horses that are stall confined and no longer can roam freely. We know that horses that get a lot of high concentrate in their diet and not enough roughage, very prone. We know pharmaceuticals such as NSAIDs and antibiotics can cause that. And we know that these signs can be rather mild, right? They're not really finishing their concentrate, a little bit of weight loss, maybe they grind their teeth. We've seen a decrease in the performance. So can be a little bit elusive to really get the right diagnosis. So I want to talk about the stomach itself to really understand gastric ulcers. And I think this is a really eloquent diagram. And when I'm talking to my horse owners about it, I ask them to sort of think of a basketball. So I'm going to think about the basketball. So we have this round looking sort of structure, this top part that says non-glandular region or the darker red area. This is where the esophagus is. This is where the food will actually enter into the stomach region. And then in the bottom, in this pink area, at the bottom part of the basketball, this is the glandular region. And this is where the hydrochloric acid of the stomach lives. So it's a very acidic environment. So it has these protecting glands to stop it from that. And then in the middle of my basketball is this line. It's had a fancy name of a Margo plicatus. And Margo is a really good structure for us to utilize when we get that scope down inside of the stomach. We need to find some landmarks so we can tell exactly where we're at. So we have the non-glandular portion at the top of the stomach, the glandular at the bottom. And as I said, the hydrochloric acid lives down here in the bottom. And there are no glands in this non-glandular section. So what we believe happens is that the acid that is in this lower section splashes or moves upward towards this non-glandular region and creates erosions on the edge of where that Margo plicatus lies. So I've got two pictures here of some horses that have been scoped. For those of you that are squeamish, I just wanted to give you a minute, but they are, whoops, I have actually, let me go right here. So what I actually have here is at the top here, let me drive you through the picture a little bit. So this bright pink that we see on the squamous portion is this top picture on the left side. That is actually Margo plicatus. That is her, and actually we see some feed stuff down here in the right corner. And then that kind of white, shiny pinkish that we see, that's actually the squamous portion or the upper part of the basketball of the stomach. When we come down to the bottom, staying on this left-hand side still, what we see is the bright red is Margo, that lighter yellow is that squamous portion. And what I see here are these little punctates, right? So if I have a grading system of 1 through 5, this little one all the way over here on the right, I'd give him about a 1, or I'd give this guy over here maybe a 4+ or even a 5. That's a pretty deep lesion. And we can see it's even kind of extending all the way out. So the philosophy is that this hydrochloric acid that's supposed to be in the bottom has splashed upward and is causing these erosions on this particular case that we're looking at. But most people don't realize that there's a second type of ulcer, and that is called the glandular ulcer. So what we're looking at now is we have taken the scope and we have gone further down into the bottom of the stomach. And we're actually looking at a structure, it's a muscular structure called the pylorus, and it's responsible for help to move feed stuff out of the stomach. And in the top portion, there's a little hole that you see right there. And we're actually looking inside the first part of the small intestine known as the duodenum. So we're peeking down that hole. But this whole structure, this is all glandular stomach that we're looking at. And if we come down to the abnormal picture on the bottom on the right-hand side, right in this right-hand corner, boy, we see a pretty deep lesion, two right next to each other. And then if I start to look around the circumference here, I'm noticing a tremendous amount of lesions and irritation and erosion in that particular tissue. This does not happen as a result of the splashing of the hydrochloric acid. This is driven by a little bit of a different mechanism. We see this a lot in horses that are on a lot of NSAIDs. So if you're utilizing a lot of non-steroidal anti-inflammatories in your component, your horses are at much higher risk for glandular ulcers. Most of us are treating for squamous ulcers. There is one FDA-approved therapy out there, which is GastroGuard, and it's approved to address equine gastric ulcer syndrome. We seem to have the best results with it when it works on the squamous portion of the stomach. So this is a proton pump inhibitor. And you may remember from the human side, Prilosec or the purple pill is the exact same thing. That is also an omeprazole, and it stops a lot of the pumps that are inside of the stomach from making too much acid. So you're trying to buffer the stomach down a little bit so that you don't kind of get quite that splashing syndrome, or it's a little less acidic on that particular time. So two different disease processes, very important to have a definitive diagnosis of scoping. We have that elusive diagnosis where we see behavioral changes, some things that I mentioned earlier, but the presumptive diagnosis really needs to happen with the 3-meter scope. And I'll even take it a step further. And after the course of therapy is done, we really should be rescoping those horses to see if the treatment regime was successful. And if we see that there's lesions in the bottom portion of the stomach, we're going to have to find a different way to address that for that particular case. We also realize that in ulcer therapy, that management is a huge key, right? You want to have lots of access to water. You want to try to minimize that horse's stressors. If he likes to be worked early in the day, doesn't like the lights on in the barn at night, whatever, we want to take as many of those stressors out as we possibly can. And we want him to roam. We want him to eat lots of forage, lots of grass. Horses that eat alfalfa make a ton of bicarb in their mouth as they're chewing with their saliva. That may have some potential benefits. And you may even consider like probiotics and prebiotics. If you're going to use NSAID or antibiotic therapy, you may think, well, let me get out ahead and have a preventative mindset rather than always having to come behind and try to treat things. Really an important change that I think we're seeing in the way that we address veterinary medicine is we're really trying to get into more of a preventative mindset than constantly putting out fires, especially with our big athletes that we really know what their stresses are and how high our expectations are for them. So I said we were going to revisit the microbiome influencers, and that is antibiotics and non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. So we know that chronic use of non-steroidal anti-inflammatories can easily lead to gastric ulceration and a disrupted equine gut microbiome, which then trickles down to a host of secondary concerns. So if I'm using NSAIDs and I'm changing that gut environment and my horses are at high risk now for ulcers, other systems are going to fail. He may start to fatigue a little bit earlier. He might not maintain his weight loss. He might go through a series of weight loss that I wasn't anticipating. Maybe something as simple as poor quality hoof growth. These systems are all interconnected, and understanding how that works is really essential. So we're going to talk about something called drug-induced dysbiosis. And like I said, I know non-steroidal anti-inflammatories are routinely used in veterinary and human medicine. And we know that the gastrointestinal injury is frequently associated with NSAIDs, and it's well documented in veterinary medicine as well as in human medicine. So we collaborated with a veterinarian at Texas A&M, Dr. Kanan Whitfield. And Dr. Whitfield is a remarkable equine veterinarian who is now dedicating part of his career to research. And he has spent a tremendous amount of time looking at non-steroidal anti-inflammatories and the way that they negatively impact the equine GI system. He's also taking a hard look at the microbiome and the way that these cells communicate information up and down. The GI system isn't just food moving in one direction. It's a two-way valve. These microbiome are competing or communicating with each other up and down those segments we had mentioned earlier. So here's his theory. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatory administration can lead to GI injury, dysbiosis, which now we know is a change in the microbiome, altered GI barrier function, leaky gut. And what he does is he quantifies it with something called 16S rDNA. And I don't want you to get hung up on that big fancy term. It is a marker that we use to see if bacteria has crossed over the gut and into the bloodstream. So in human medicine, they utilize 16S for Crohn's disease, irritable bowel syndrome. And Dr. Whitfield's group was able to quantify that human technology in horses so that he can measure to see if this bacteria has in fact crossed over into the bloodstream. So it's an evaluation of intestinal permeability. He chose phenylbutazone to look at because phenylbutazone is known to induce certain components, but he wanted to see if he could apply a nutritional supplementation a wellness formula with omega fatty acids and antioxidants, prebiotics, probiotics, and L-Glutamine, and see if he could mitigate the effects of the non-steroidal on those parameters that we just outlined. It's a very eloquent study. He's an amazing researcher. We've got 3 groups, 3 simple groups with 10 horses in each group. We're going to have a control group. Those horses are not going to receive any bute, and they're not going to receive any nutritional supplementation. And then I've got a group that's just going to receive phenylbutazone alone. And then I've got a group that is going to be on a comprehensive wellness formula for 50 days. And then all groups are going to get the phenylbutazone on day 50, and they're going to get it for 10 days. So it's a 60-day study. So supplemented horses started on day 1. They ate it for 50 days, and then we treated all the horses at the exact same time. Then we collected blood on those days outlined, as well as we scoped these horses the day before they got the phenylbutazone and then the last day that they got the phenylbutazone. Really, really nice design if you think about it. So kind of an odd looking graph. You're thinking, Dr. Maxwell, I am not trying to get a DVM here. This is a very, very relatable topic and relatable information. So what we have on the axis, on the horizon, we have time in days, right? And what we have on the y-axis going up and down is the fold increase of the 16S in the blood. So we see at day 50, those horses were given phenylbutazone in the red group here, and that we see by day 4, we had a 4-time increase circulating S, which means that those horses within 4 days of receiving phenylbut went into a leaky gut syndrome right away. I would be amiss if I didn't point out that the body is constantly trying to repair itself. It's one of the most unique marvels about systems. If you scratch yourself on your arm, your body is automatically going to start to put healing into process. So here, this wasting all this energy trying to repair it, but it winds up trying to tighten those junctions back up again. The red line, the green line that you see there, that's the control group. These are horses that did not receive any phenylbutazone, and they did not receive any supplementation. They just stayed on their regular diet, and they stayed within a reasonable and acceptable range. And then the blue horses that you see there outlined, those are the horses that were on a comprehensive wellness nutrition for 50 days and then given phenylbutazone. And in the face of a phenylbutazone challenge, those gut integrity, those enterocytes were able to maintain that watertight junction. Those horses did not suffer from leaky gut despite being challenged with the phenylbutazone. I said we scoped these horses. Again, same 10 horses, 3 groups. The first column is the phenylbutazone plus the supplement. The second is the control group. And then the third is the phenylbutazone alone group. There were 10 horses in each sector. In the phenylbutazone, we'll start over on the right-hand side. Each one of those colors and squares represents 1 horse. 6 out of 10 horses got glandular ulcers, not squamous ulcers, glandular ulcers. 2 had a grade 3, 3 had a grade 2, and 1 had a grade 1. When we scoped the control groups, those horses did not have any ulcers at all, as was anticipated. And when we scoped the supplemented group that was challenged with the phenylbutazone, we only had 1 get a grade 2, again, glandular ulcers, and 9 horses that did not. Very remarkable, very interesting data. Definitely warrants further investigation, which is exactly what we're doing with Dr. Whitfield. So we know that in this particular group of horses that were challenged with the phenylbutazone, we were able to keep those ulcer scores, induce less ulcer scores than in the horses that received the phenylbutazone. And then finally, which I think is also very interesting, is that Texas A&M is down in College Station, and they had a remarkably hot summer. The temperature was about 110 to 115 for an extended period of time while this particular study was going on. Again, same group of horses. We're going to start on the right-hand side with the phenylbutazone horse. The phenylbutazone horses, on average, lost about 80 pounds just from the heat. The control horses, which got nothing, just maintained their regular diet, full access to water, those horses lost 50 pounds during that heat wave. And then the phenylbutazone plus the supplemented horses lost an average of 20 pounds. So it was a really, really good study. He showed us that, yes, phenylbutazone altered the fecal microbiota, crossing over. It increased the 16S in the circulation. It induced gastric ulceration. And we also saw a significant decrease in weight for both the control and the phenylbutazone horses during that pre-treatment phase. So these changes were attenuated. The supplemented horses were attenuated with a comprehensive wellness formula, including omega-3 fatty acids, antioxidants, prebiotics, probiotics, and L-Glutamine. So, in Dr. Whitfield's words, these findings suggest that phenylbutazone induced GI injury, including impaired barrier function, and that these changes can be attenuated with specific nutritional supplementation. So we opened up and we talked about the microbiome and the influence that it has on health and disease. We talked about leaky gut syndrome, and then we talked about gastric ulcer syndrome, and found that these systems are all connected. And when treated as an entire system, you can impact them in a positive way. So we're not just treating just the stomach for ulcers, or we're not just treating the hind gut for the microbiome. We need to think, how do we knit these things together, and how do we prevent these things becoming to attrition in our particular horses? So at Platinum Performance, you know, we have the 3 foundations. We have the original wellness formula that was created by Dr. Herthel over 25 years ago now. And in that, he had 57 different components that added up to it. Heavy on omega-3s, antioxidants, vitamins, trace minerals, a host of things that are in there that are really meant to work synergistically together. But the latest addition to the Platinum Foundation team is the Platinum GI. And what we did here is we took the original wellness formula and we added probiotics, prebiotics, and L-Glutamine to the original formulation. So Platinum GI is not just for horses that suffer from GI issues, right? It's if we're keeping the GI system functioning optimally, then those other systems, cardiac, respiratory, musculoskeletal, reproductive, can also function at an optimal level. The probiotics that we choose they're living microorganisms, and they are yeast-based. They are a Saccharomyces boulardii and a Saccharomyces cerevisiae. And these yeasts support the protection of the intestinal lining from harmful bacteria. It promotes a healthy immune system and the continued function of the gastrointestinal barrier. So it's a good digestive aid with enzymes that helps with optimal absorption and digestion. And then the prebiotics that we chose are Aspergillus oryzae and its fermented products, as well as mannan oligosaccharide. And I have a lot of horse owners ask me, well, what's the difference between a probiotic and a prebiotic? And the simple analogy that I've used over the years is that a probiotic is your lawn, and the prebiotics is the fertilizer that you put onto the lawn. In other words, the prebiotic is able to modify the microbial ecosystem of the intestinal and helps to keep control or the pathogenic bacteria at bay. So probiotics and prebiotics are very, very important. If we're utilizing antibiotics or non-steroidal anti-inflammatories in our practice, we utilize probiotics and prebiotics routinely and have very good success with them. But also in the GI is L-Glutamine. And L-Glutamine is the most abundant and conditionally essential amino acid due to the body's inability to synthesize it in bouts of very stressful conditions. There's ample evidence both on human medicine as well as veterinary medicine that L-Glutamine is very good at repairing those enterocytes. Remember those blue boxes that had those protein buttons that like to break down? L-Glutamine is the amino acid that you need to have on board to help maintain that normal permeability of the gut and the reparative effects that it is absolutely able to offer. So a lot of you are thinking, well, I'm very familiar with your products. Thank you very much, Dr. Maxwell, but I've been using Platinum CJ for a long period of time. I love the avocado soy unsaponifiable that you have in there. I love the acetyl myrisoliate and the boswellia. I'm not willing to give that up for the Platinum GI. That is not a problem. What we can do is add the probiotic, the prebiotic, and the L-Glutamine in the form of a product that we sell called Platinum Balance. So Platinum Balance is what I'm putting out to my customers when I put a horse on an antibiotic. I want them on that prebiotic, probiotic, and the L-Glutamine. So you can either buy the two individually, or if you like to have it, we could certainly add it to the pack if that's the way that you're comfortable feeding it within your particular barn or your horse likes it that way. We do have another product that addresses gastric support, and that's something called Fermaid 187. We sell it as gastric support, and this is a non-pharmaceutical yeast product that was designed to take advantage of the unique benefits of the Lactobacillus delbrueckii. And it is very good at trying to maintain GI integrity. This is very efficient on the glandular ulcer portion of the stomach. So it plays a big role in that component. A number of years ago, we had done a clinical field trial at Alamo Pintata where they had induced ulcers in horses, which is not that hard to do. You take their feed away for a period of time and an ulcer comes up relatively quickly. And what we wanted to do was look at the Delbrueckii and the fermented products and treating those gastric ulcers. And what we were able to realize is that we scoped all of these particular horses, that the supplement horses with the Platinum gastric support significantly increased the speed of healing of those gastric ulcers. In other words, between day 0 and day 4, when we scoped them, we had a statistically significant improvement in the ulcer grading of those particular scores. So if you find yourself chronically using GastroGuard over and over and over again and maybe not getting the results, you may want to have a better scoping and find out if in fact you're not maybe dealing with a different ulcer than what you had originally anticipated. We have a very, very nice educational series at Platinum Performance. We've got a really nice webinar on gastric ulcers, and Dr. Chad Davis had done it, and he had left this really good quote. And he said, if you're going to induce stressors on that gastrointestinal tract that naturally come with training and competition, you have to find a way to manage them. In other words, he's really pushing us to take a much more proactive approach. Instead of waiting for the ulcers to be there and then putting out these little fires, we've lost too much time. We've lost too much training time. We need to start to think in a more preventative mindset in really how we're managing these horses that we're putting into stressful situations. We also have Platinum Magazine, which is extremely popular. If you're not getting it at your house, if you go to your local clinic around the corner, we send them tons of copies. This particular cover is the one that has the Understanding Ulcers article, which is absolutely excellent. And you can go to Platinum Performance /articles, Understanding Ulcers, and you can find it in a PDF version if you would like to as well. So I think there's a couple of things sort of in concluding. I think having a clear understanding of the equine GI structure and function really maximizes your ability to recognize the wide array of digestive conditions that can actually threaten the horse, right? Colic is an elusive box, but now that you have a mind's eye of potentially what's going on in there, you're a lot more informed. For anyone who's ever suffered through the roller coaster of colic or battled gastric ulcers or even hindgut acidosis, the balance between a properly functioning GI versus a less than optimal system is really, really tenuous. Assess your horses daily, maintain a constant forage-based diet, integrate feed changes slowly to allow those microorganisms in the fermentation vat to adapt to those alterations, and certainly consult a veterinarian immediately if you discover any of these abnormalities. The team that you see pictured here are our Platinum advisors. They are an amazing team. They all own horses. They're Cal Poly grads with an animal science or nutrition background. They are at that 1-800 number, and they are filled with advice and can guide you and steer you. Certainly thinking about advanced nutrition can feel like a daunting task, and their job is to make it as easy and as simple as you possibly can imagine. They're terrific to talk to. Bring your veterinarian into the conversation, the trainer into the conversation. Let's get these horses exactly what they need to make them as optimal as we possibly can. So with that, Miranda, I am done with my speaking component. So I am going to stop sharing my screen and see if we probably have some questions out there. Where did it go? Oops. And there we are. Excellent. So I know we were monitoring the chat for a few minutes, and I will allow Miranda to come off of. So an excellent question. And Jane has the question, and she says, I was wondering when any studies have been done on the effect of Equiox on gastric health. And actually, Dr. Whitfield has done some extensive research at Texas A&M and finds that we see pretty much the same things with Equiox that we do with phenylbutazone and even Banamine. So we were thinking that a COX-2 selective inhibitor, which is what Equiox is, that it would lead to potentially less ulcers in a horse, or maybe not be as caustic to the environment as, say, something like phenylbutazone. But it seems that it kind of actually breaks down some of the mucoid layer inside of the gut and actually leaves those horses pretty vulnerable. So it is, that's an excellent question. But yes, they seem to also be insulting to the environment, unfortunately. So then Joy has a question, and I have some teammates on here, Emily Smith, who does our podcast. And if you haven't been listening to the Platinum Performance podcast, you're way behind because they're absolutely fantastic. But Joy is going to ask a question. How does the Purina product of Outlast compare to the Platinum Performance products? And I have to say that I am not familiar with Purina Outlast, so I'm not very knowledgeable on that particular product, and I didn't know if maybe Emily or even Jesse had some input there for me. Then I've got
Tori.
Hey, how we doing?
I'm well, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Jessie from Platinum Performance, and I am actually going to turn this over to Emily Smith. But Joy, if you wouldn't mind sending your email address to me, that would be great. And I'm going to pass this on to Emily Smith, which is, Emily is a equine nutritionist. She has a master's in equine nutrition, and she'll be really familiar, and she'll give you a whole detailed answer on that. So my email is Jessie, Jessie, at platinumperformance.com. So please go ahead and shoot me a quick email with your personal email address, and we will get that question answered to you directly, no problem.
Excellent. Really good resource. Platinum is just an amazing company. So we have another question here. Are there a few easy to look out for symptoms to tell the difference between stomach or hind gut ulcers? And only by scope, or can you only ID it by scope or blood work? So that's really a very excellent question. There are some acupuncture points that we do utilize in trying to determine gastric ulcers in the horse. One of them is kind of underneath where the sternum is. And if I sort of tap the sternum or press heavily on there and I get them to really jump, it tells me that there's probably some sensitivity in the stomach. Where the hind gut ulcers, they typically happen more on the right side. I may have horses that are sluggish with their changes from left to right when they're doing a flying lead change, or I may have horses that are very sensitive to being touched in that particular area. In other words, I can brush them on the left side and they don't mind it at all. And I brush them on the right side and they get kind of cranky and a little bit pensive. So those are sort of two little tips to sort of keep going there. And then somebody else is asking, we have been using sucralfate for my mare's ulcers. She was treated for Lyme's disease. She's on 45 minocycline a day for 5 weeks. She is high stress, anxious. Do antibiotics usually work on stomach or hind gut? So it typically works on hind gut. So when I'm utilizing an antimicrobial, say I have a tooth abscess on a horse that I'm trying to resolve, I know that I'm going to have a negative impact on the bacteria that live in that hind gut. And we get what's called a shift to the left. And we lose a lot of the Firmicutes and the Bacteroides that we really are the really good, strong bacteria. So that's when we introduce the probiotic, prebiotics, and the L-Glutamine, trying to keep those changes from happening. We had done nice work out of Colorado State University with a triple boarded veterinarian named Dr. Diana Hassel, and she had shown the negative effects of an antibiotic. She chose Exceed, which is sold as Ceftiofur, and we see a dramatic shift to the left. And then when she put those horses on a probiotic, a prebiotic, and the L-Glutamine, she put them on the Platinum Balance and then administered the antibiotics, that microbial environment stayed in a normal homeostasis, that the probiotic, prebiotic, and L-Glutamine were able to overcome the negative effects of an antibiotic. So you may consider that for your particular horse and see if you don't see some results. If they're on a long-term therapy like that, it looks like this horse is on it for 5 weeks. I typically use 2 weeks, but for this particular horse, I would probably consider a month or the entire time that you're on the antimicrobial. So, excellent. So yeah, somebody is asking, if my horse is already suffering from ulcers and I don't know, can these preventative supplements help repair these unseen damages? I have many horses in and out of my barn. Is there still value even when we may not know how they are all feeling? So I think it's hard to go backwards on a question like this. I think my answer is in the group of horses that we did at Texas A&M, that we knew that we were going to induce trauma, that we were able to mitigate that. So taking a proactive approach, even if your horse is in the middle of a disease process right now, putting advanced nutrition into play, helping those cells. We know that advanced nutrition is having a profound impact on what's known as the phospholipid bilayer of the cell. We know that our nutritional components are having a profound effect on ATP and oxidative stress that cells are going through. So a horse that's suffering from ulcers has other stressors that he's going through. I can't see where taking a preventative approach would not be beneficial. So I would recommend looking into that deeper and having that conversation with your veterinarian, or certainly the 800 number at the company. I think those girls could take you into a deep dive conversation about that particular case and see if that doesn't help you resolve or mitigate those symptoms. You know, the nice thing about working with a company that is as quality as Platinum Performance is, we invest heavily in the research, but it's the quality of the company is just exceptional. We have 100% satisfaction guarantee. If you get it and nothing works and the horse is not resolving, you contact us. We stand behind that. If we get those horses on that foundation formula, we have a very nice colic coverage program where we have up to $10,000 of colic surgical reimbursement. There are a lot of supporting things that Platinum really believes in the products and the way that we're addressing nutrition. We call it advanced nutrition. We're affecting things on the cellular level, and we know that from the research. So that's why I'm trying to get a proactive approach. I have a good question. It says, is it possible to overdo pre and probiotics? I find different feeds and supplements, add them, and I sometimes worry it's too much. So Emily is typing an answer? Or they've already been answered?
Sorry, Tori. If you will answer that one, I'm going to type to the next.
Oh, okay. Got it. Got it. So our feeling is no, that what happens is that microbial environment, my microbial environment finds a place of homeostasis, the place where it is the happiest. We want to keep that pathogenic bacteria at bay, right? Everybody's walking around with a tiny bit of E. coli and a wee bit of salmonella in you, but you have such strong good bacteria that they're keeping all of that suppressed. So if the horse does not need it, he will push it out and it'll wind up on the stall mats. I want you to be economic about it, and I want you to get the best return on your investment. If you're going to invest in these products, I want to make sure that those horses are actually benefiting from it. So I think finding a nice balance, and then like I shared, a company like Platinum that has some research behind it, I think is also a really nice tool to have. It says, my horse is presently on Platinum GI and CJ. Is that redundant? Oops, the question went away. Whoop, 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 whoop. Did you ever? I was just suffering from.
I did answer that one.
Excellent, thank you.
Tori, that might be a good one to address for the group, though. As far as CJ and balance versus GI, it's such a common one that we get.
Yeah, we had mentioned that if that particular owner would like to keep on the CJ and add the balance, she would be getting the benefits of both of those. So the question here is a really good question. It says, which products cover colic surgery? So what we have are 3 foundation formulas: the Platinum Wellness Equine, the Platinum CJ, which stands for complete joint, and then the Platinum GI. If they are on the Platinum GI, they are eligible for up to $10,000 of colic surgical reimbursement. If they are on the Wellness and the CJ, they're eligible for $8,000 worth of colic surgical reimbursement, unless you add the stomach formulas of the Balance and or the Ulcer Guard. So I know that sounds confusing, but it's not. The Wellness, $8,000, that you can add Balance and Ulcer to that formulation. Same thing with CJ. Put them on CJ, and if you add Balance or Ulcer, you bump up to $10,000. And again, you can certainly call the 1-800 number at the company. It's a very easy enrollment. You put the horse on it for 30 days. After that 30-day period, the horse is eligible. He could not have had previous abdominal surgery. A veterinarian comes out, does a short wellness exam on him. You enroll into auto ship, and then you're on your way, and your horse is in colic coverage. So very, very, very nice program, and complimentary. It comes, the company offers it to you as a complimentary program. So a lot of horses in colic coverage. Excellent. And we're doing really well here. This is a really interactive group. I'm really thrilled to see that. Maybe if I refresh this. So yeah, we've come to the top of the hour here, and really thank everybody for their interaction. And I really don't want you to stop here. I know you are information seekers. Go to platinumperformance.com, find those ulcer articles, find some microbiome. If you scratch the surface of equine microbiome in Google, you are going to find a plethora of information. It's such an interesting topic, and one that we were really early adopters and understood that this is going to be a huge component going forward in health, but also in mitigating disease in horses. So Miranda, thank you very much. I hope we get to do this again next year, because I certainly enjoy them. I would much rather fly down to Palm Beach and be between the Grand Prix and the Hunter Ring, but maybe next year.
Excellent. Yeah, I definitely come join us. And so thank you, of course, Dr. Tori Maxwell, Jesse Van Goa, Emily Smith, our moderators at the Q&A. And again, Dr. Tori Maxwell, that was super informative, very excellent. And thank you so much. And of course, lastly, thank you to Platinum Performance for your very generous sponsorship. And I will also say to please join us next Thursday for more continued learning at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for WEF Week 5. Can't believe it's already WEF Week 5 almost. Crazy. And that topic is Mastering Nutrition, a genuinely unique approach to equine nutrition, bone density, and tendinitis. Sponsored by High Gain USA. And don't forget to register directly on the PBIEC website to secure your spot and to count as one entry for the grand prize $3,000 giveaway from Karina Brez Jewelry. And again, thank you so much, Dr. Tori Maxwell, our moderators, and to Platinum Performance. This was excellent, and hope to see you all next week, and have a wonderful evening. Thanks again, and good night.